The Kamishibai story I'm going to tell you today is called The Oni Who Sank to the Bottom of the Sea. Now, in Japanese folk tales, an Oni is an ogre. So, kind of a little bit like a giant, and quite often in stories, the Onis have these superpowers that can kind of move things in the landscape. So if you think of like large rocks and lakes and things that are formed in nature, sometimes it's thought to believe that the Onis are the ones who have put them where we have them now. So this is a cool story called The Oni Who Sank to the Bottom of the Sea. Long ago, deep in the mountains, there lived an Oni. The Oni had a baby Oni who was still very small and was always running around and sometimes into his father's legs. Because this tickled the father's toes and because the baby was so dear to him, the father Oni could not help but smile. Often they played together. The father Oni picked his son up between his fingers and tossed him toward the distant mountains. Whoosh! Yippee! I made it! The baby Oni landed just on top of a big rock and clapped his hands. Come, Daddy, you come too! The father Oni was so gigantic that he could hop over to the mountain in one jump. Then he would pick the baby Oni up again and whoosh! Toss him over to a mountain even further away. This was how the father Oni brought his baby son up, by throwing him from mountain to mountain. When the baby Oni grew tired, his father would give him a ride on his shoulders, and they would sing this song. My big baby boy, what's your wish? What do you want? I want the sun up in the sky. Now, you can't have the sun, my boy. I want the moon up so high. You can't have the moon, my boy. I want the wind to help me fly. Ah, you can't have the wind, my boy. Then give your horns to me. One day, when they were playing and singing in this manner, they suddenly found that they had followed the river much farther down the mountain than usual. As they stopped to rest, an old man came walking toward them, leading his grandson by the hand. Without even noticing the Oni's feet, the old man buried something in the ground and, placing some sacred branches on either side of it, began to pray very hard. The Oni thought the old man's actions were very strange, so he asked, "Old man, what are you doing?" His voice was like thunder falling from the sky, and it startled the old man, who looked up and up and up. Wah! There was the face of a gigantic Oni. "Old man, what are you doing?" Well, I'm from the village up the road on the bay. The waves of the sea have been getting rougher and rougher. First they swept away one member of my family, then two, and then three. Now my grandson and I are the only ones left. So that is why I'm burying a pot with offerings inside it, and we were praying that it may appease the anger of the gods. What? You say the sea is rough? The Oni leapt up to a lookout point high up on one of the mountains. He could see the blue waters of the sea shining very innocently in the sun, as if they had never done anyone any harm. You mean to tell me that that sea is rough? Well, yes, said the old man. It is calm right now, but on a stormy day, huge waves come crashing toward the shore and wash people and boats away with them. If we had one tiny little island in our bay, it would protect us from the waves and the waters would always be calm. But of course, that's only wishful thinking. The Oni never forgot what the old man said that day. One morning, many months later, the Oni woke to a terrible storm. Ooh, ooh. The trees on the mountains trembled in the wind as if they were on the verge of being blown away. The rain fell in torrents like a waterfall. The rocks from the cliffs gave way and tumbled down the mountainside with a crash. Just then, what flashed through the Oni's mind was the image of the old man and his grandson. "Ooh, I just can't sit here. The old man and his grandson are going to be swallowed up by the sea unless I do something." Clasping his arms around a huge boulder the size of a mountain, which was standing in front of his cave, the Oni rocked it back and forth, until crack! It came loose. Boom! He threw it to the ground. "Daddy!" The baby Oni was frightened and began to cry, but the father Oni said nothing. He clasped his arms around another enormous boulder and rocked it back and forth, until crack! It came loose. "Daddy, Daddy!" The baby Oni began to cry again. "Don't cry, son." The Oni made a hole in each of the boulders and stuck them onto the ends of an iron rod. "Daddy, where are you going?" "Down to the bay. Now you wait here for me." "No, I want to go too. I want to go too." Tears sprang from the baby Oni's eyes and he fell to the ground, kicking his feet and crying. Finally, his father had no choice but to take him. "Well then, climb onto one of these boulders." When the baby Oni climbed on, the father Oni, struggling with all his might, lifted the two great rocks off the ground. Heave ho, heave ho! Step by painful step, the ogre made his way over the mountains, but the boulders he was carrying were so big and so heavy that he felt as if his back were going to break. Even so, he gritted his teeth and struggled on. Finally, he reached the sea. Like a vicious monster, the ocean bared its white fangs and crashed furiously onto the beach. On the shore, the villagers were waving bamboo poles with scythes tied to ends, chanting, "Storm, storm, go away, leave our village, leave our bay." This was supposed to be some sort of magic spell to quiet the sea, but what good could it possibly do? The waves swelled up so high they seemed to be touching the sky, and then they surged toward the beach with a roar. Just then, "Oh, look," said an old man, "it's the Oni we met the other day." The old man and his grandson shouted a greeting to him. When he saw them, the Oni smiled. "Okay, here goes." The Oni took a step into the water, but then suddenly remembered the baby Oni was still sitting on one of the boulders. "Get off, son, and wait for me here." "No, no, I'm going too. I want to go with you," said the baby Oni. "No, no, it's dangerous." "I won't be afraid if I'm with you." "Ah, well, then you may come, but don't cry." "I won't cry." The Oni plunged his feet deep into the ocean. One of the villagers yelled, "Help! An Oni!" And then another cried, "But there's an Oni!" Until that moment, the villagers had been looking out toward the sea and had not even noticed the Oni. Suddenly, they panicked and fell over each other, trying to run away. The Oni did not even look in their direction as he walked straight onwards, deeper into the ocean. Crash, roar, crash, roar. The waves rushed wildly in toward the shore, crashing against the Oni's body. But the Oni shut his mouth tightly and pressed onward. The waves beat against him, filling his eyes, ears, and nose with water. The baby Oni began to cry. "Daddy, Daddy, I'm scared." Boom, crash, boom. A powerful wave swept the Oni off his feet and he stumbled heavily. As the father Oni began to fall, he held his son high up in the air with one hand so that the baby Oni would not drown as the father Oni sank under the waves. "Daddy, Daddy!" The baby Oni cried and cried until he could cry no longer. He had cried so long and so hard that he had turned into stone. So you'll notice the picture of the two rocks. When you are all grown up, you might think about visiting a bay called Kure on the island of Shikoku. There you can still see the two boulders the Oni carried into the bay to protect the village. You can still see the baby Oni rock, and the holes that held the iron rod are still there too. Even today, these rocks protect the people from the stormy sea. And instead of saying the end, in Japan, they say Oshimai. And that is the end of my story.